one of the most dreaded in terms of diagnosis. A stealer of hopes and dreams that demands an agonizing journey, which often ends in tragedy. Thank you for joining us on Return to Eden. Today, we're going to be discussing how you can fight back against the risks of cancer. My name is Kendra Han, fitness and nutrition specialist, and I'm here today with Jamie Woodle, integrative nutrition health coach and master of health science education. Jamie, it's estimated that over 2 million people in 2024 will be diagnosed with cancer, and almost everyone either has been or knows someone who has been diagnosed with cancer. With October being Breast Cancer Awareness Month, do you know anyone who has had that kind of diagnosis?
Unfortunately, I do. My own mother had breast cancer back in 2010. I remember the phone call. My husband and I were stationed in England at RAF Lake and Heath, and my mom gave us the call that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. They did catch it early, so she sought some traditional treatments, and now today, 14 years later, she is still cancer-free. And I just remember feeling so hopeless. I was so far away.
Yeah.
And I felt like I couldn't do anything to support her because I was active duty at the time. And but I'm so grateful to still have my mom today.
Yeah, what a blessing to be cancer-free. And similarly, one of my good friends I've had for 12 years received a breast cancer diagnosis at quite a young age, and she was already stage 4 by the time she was even diagnosed.
Wow.
She also, I believe it's been 7 or 8 years, is cancer-free. She ended up having a double mastectomy, but she's doing so much better now. So I agree, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that there's just this feeling of hopelessness. I wasn't an ocean away, only several states. And it is a powerless feeling when someone that you love very much receives such a daunting diagnosis. According to the National Cancer Institute, cancer is a disease in which some of your body's cells grow uncontrollably, ignoring the normal signals of your cell's life cycle. According to the National Cancer Institute, cancer is a disease in which some of the cells in your body grow uncontrollably. There are estimated to be over 100 different types of cancers. And these cancers form tumors, which are made up of trillions of cells that are basically tricking your body into not experiencing a normal cell death. One of the methods that they use to trick your immune system is in using different nutrients than the healthy cells to grow and multiply. And like we said earlier, just totally ignoring that cell death part where typically your body would just dispose of damaged or mutated cells.
Yeah, it really is a gross malfunction at the cellular level where these cells are damaged, they mutate, and then they avoid apoptosis, as you said, the cell death, which our immune system and our cells are made to do when there's damaged cells. And, you know, your whole life, these cells get damaged and your body gets rid of them. Well, when they avoid that natural apoptosis, cell death, then they can often end up proliferating or growing and spreading throughout the body.
One fact that I find interesting is that cancer seems to be much more prevalent in Western societies, no doubt due to all of the inflammatory factors that we encounter every day.
Yeah. It really is largely a Western civilization problem. And that's not saying it doesn't happen around the world, but it is a significant problem in our society today. And the risk factors for developing cancer are higher here, and we're exposed to them more frequently. So it's not just genetics, it's diet and lifestyle and even environmental factors that play a role in us developing cancer.
You mentioned genetics, so that's like BRCA1 and BRCA2 being an indicator of a predisposition for breast cancer or ovarian cancer.
Yeah, and you may have heard, you know, there's a lot of women who do some genetic testing. Maybe they have a family history and they just want to know early on. And some of them will take a precautionary measure and have a mastectomy just to try to minimize any risk or eliminate it, in some cases, the risk of developing breast cancer later on in life. But you know, we really always thought for a lot of issues that genetics play this huge role, but research is really showing that it is our lifestyle and environmental factors that are increasing our risk of developing cancer. And it's especially bad. I mean, We have talked so much on the show about how our system really sets us up for ill health between toxins in the air and the water and the processed foods and the chemicals that we're exposed to through our care products. We are set up to become sick. And in the U.S., we spend over $150 billion only on cancer care. Only cancer care.
That is such an astronomical number.
It is. It's mind-blowing.
You have to think about the stress levels, too. I mean, we exist in a society where it's go, go, go all the time. And it almost seems like we're much more willing to sacrifice a healthy and peaceful life than we are to reduce productivity.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure on us to provide for our families and to succeed. And sometimes our health takes a back seat to that.
Let's talk about some other factors that come into play. I know we've discussed a lot on the show, different things that we have in our lives that increase inflammation. So would those things like lack of exercise, your gut microbiome, chronic inflammation also play into your risk of cancer?
Absolutely. And there are a lot of factors like those that you've stated that are overlooked. And so one example is oncogenic viruses. That's something you may not have heard very much of, oncogenic viruses. Mm-hmm. But research is showing that there are certain viruses that can linger in the body, creating inflammation, and they cause dysfunction in the cell that makes it grow into tumors uncontrollably. So an example of this would be hepatitis B and C. They're finding that those have been linked to liver cancer. HPV has been found to possibly be causing up to 50% of mouth and throat cancers, as well as reproductive and cervical cancers.
I was not aware of that. And that's human papillomavirus,
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. There's also the Epstein-Barr virus. It's been linked to the development of lymphomas as well. Now, that's something you just don't hear very often. People don't realize, but it's important to know. So these viruses are in the body and they suppress the immune system so that those killer T cells cannot identify these dysfunctioning cells and eliminate them.
So we've talked about genetics, we've talked about environmental factors in terms of inflammation, but I'm curious, what about inflammation related to obesity or excess adipose tissue? That is also a chronic issue in Western societies.
Yeah, and I have read, all throughout my education and my training about how obesity is related to the increased risk of all chronic diseases, including cancer. Well, during my research for this particular show, I found a very interesting analogy that I'd like to share on how the extra adipose tissue or fat cells in our body actually cause this inflammation and can contribute to the development of cancer. So there is an analogy, it's called the balloon analogy, where you picture a fat cell kind of like maybe a water balloon. And as this water balloon gets overly stuffed, like a fat cell, it can develop cracks, a little bit of seepage and leakage. And what is happening is this cell is releasing these substances that are pro-inflammatory. These include chemokines, cytokines, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF-A. So when these swollen and leaking water balloon-like cells that we're talking about are constantly releasing these pro-inflammatory things that signal the immune system, and this goes on for years, and let's say you keep gaining weight and your body creates new fat cells, and then those get swollen and those get swollen, and now you have more leaking and more leaking. This causes an increased chronic systemic inflammatory state. And so it's no wonder that obesity can be a contributor to the development of cancer.
Yeah, it really feels like almost a self-perpetuating problem. Like once you start that domino, it just goes and goes and goes until you really force a stop.
Yeah, and additionally, this inflammation that's being created from these leaking water balloon fat cells is that this disrupts hormone signals, and you can develop things like insulin resistance or other hormonal imbalances. Another problem with developing extra fat cells and all this inflammation is that the toxins that we take in, let's talk about forever chemicals, the things that are secreted out of microplastics.
Right.
Those are bioaccumulated in the fat cell. So not only are your fat cells leaking these pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines and TNF-A, they're also leaking these different chemicals that are being stored in there. And now you have more fat cells that are storing more toxins and more fat cells storing more toxins. And now we're leaking so many times more than if we had maintained a healthy weight. So it's all around a huge contributor.
What a terrifying thing to consider when you look at obesity rates in Western societies. And really, we've touched on this in other programs, how our system, these Western civilization systems, set us up for those kinds of things. You know, we live this life of focusing on convenience and am I going to feed my kids nothing before basketball practice or am I going to get them a cheeseburger and some French fries? It's really frustrating from the perspective of people who are trying to educate themselves to see so many suffering when they really don't have to. And it's not just obesity or genetics or any of those things either. Let's talk about factors that are truly natural, like sun damage, changing the texture of your skin and inhibiting your body's ability to absorb vitamin D.
So when you think about, as we age and we're exposed to a lot of sunlight, we can develop kind of leathery skin. I see it on a lot of women, including maybe myself, some early signs of that skin that's just been exposed to sunlight over and over and over again. Well, as that skin gets damaged and kind of like scarring happens and it turns a little leathery, it can no longer absorb the sunlight as well to make that vitamin D. And they're finding a correlation between low vitamin D and the development of breast cancer specifically.
Well, vitamin D we know is a potent anti-inflammatory, so that makes perfect sense with everything else that we've been learning through this program too.
Another fascinating factor coming out of science right now is that they are looking at the microbiomes of people with cancer compared to healthy controls, and not just microbiomes as it exists in our gut, but also the microbiome that exists in our mouth, on the cervix, in the bladder. And they're finding that there is a difference in number and types of microbes found in those with cancer compared to healthy controls. So one example is there was a study done where they were looking at the microbiome in the bladder of bladder cancer patients. And they found that there was a higher number of Fusobacterium and decreased Streptococcus than healthy controls. And so overall, they're finding a link between dysbiosis of whatever environment and the development of cancer.
So it's looking like having a wide array or variety of microbes is really vital to having a harmonious balance. What can we do to fight back against such a calamitous disease?
Well, you can fight back in two main ways. Number one is reduce inflammation, and do this by reducing your exposure to inflammatory factors.
Right.
And we have talked at length in many of our shows about things that we are exposed to that cause inflammation. So this can look like eating an anti-inflammatory diet,
right,
where you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, eating the rainbow.
Yes.
And really reducing processed foods, inflammatory seed oils, things like that. But there's many factors where you can take control.
Another way could be limiting those environmental exposures. So maybe you switch to using different types of products for makeup or hair care, or even something simple like switching to distilled water, for instance, making sure that you're using organic coffees rather than the heavily processed kinds that are so high in those pesticides and forever chemicals.
Maybe they'll decide to use our Eden shampoo or our body wash. We have some wonderful lotion also at edensessentials.com.
And Simply His has some wonderful options as far as coffee and tea are concerned if you're looking for something that's a little bit more in line with reducing that inflammation.
It can really be overwhelming when you think about all the ways that we are exposed to inflammatory factors. So if you struggle to eliminate all of them, if you want extra help in reducing your inflammation, you can also supplement with things that are highly anti-inflammatory to help your body deal with this inflammatory condition that we're constantly exposed to.
And if you're looking for some powerful anti-inflammatory supplements, go to edensessentials.com. We have black cumin seed oil, bitter apricot kernels, and our Organigold curcumin is a wonderful product if you're trying to really battle those inflammatory factors that we just don't have control of. I mean, we can't fix everything all at once. It's progress, not perfection.
Right. And really anybody could benefit from taking some extra black cumin seed oil.
I agree, definitely.
Or some soursop tea. I really enjoy that one.
Oh, the soursop is one of our most popular products for that reason,
Yes.
I believe.
Well, Lynette does that. Lynette Hill. If you haven't heard of Lynette Hill, she has written this book called Overcoming Cancer, and it's all about her journey from metastatic breast cancer to health and putting that cancer in remission. And she is just glowing and radiant today. And if you haven't seen it, go back in the archives and find our episode where we interviewed Lynette Hill. But she takes black cumin seed oil, bitter apricot seeds,
And the soursop
and the
tea.
soursop tea. Yeah.
She also uses our body wash, our pink grapefruit body wash, as her face wash. So
Yes,
if
I started doing that.
If you love Lynette Hill's skin, definitely take a look at that product.
And the second thing that we can do is focus, as always, healing the gut. We talked about how they're linking issues with the microbiome and not having the correct balance with developing cancer. So really looking into healing the gut using the 4 R's, which again, we did an episode on healing the gut, and we talked about using the 4 R's of gut health to do that. You can find that episode in the archives. But just real quick, to work on your gut health, increase your fiber intake for sure, because those healthy microbes that we want lots of, they mainly eat protein and fiber.
And like we've mentioned before, consuming those fermented foods, being sure that they are the ones that have live cultures. Typically, you'll want to look in the refrigerated sections, not on the middle part of the store, to make sure that you're getting a good number of those healthy bacteria. Another option would be taking a probiotic, which we do discuss in that gut health episode as well. And of course, because we've already noted obesity as something that increases your risk factor, exercise is something that, according to the National Cancer Institute, can reduce your risk of diagnosis by as much as 21%. If you've already been diagnosed and you're exercising regularly, your risk of death because of that cancer can go down by up to 40 to 45%.
Wow, that's pretty good odds.
Research is incomplete, but of course we know that reducing your BMI or your body mass index does reduce your body's overall inflammation, which is what we had discussed earlier.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, regularly exercising can help modulate your hormones. It helps in terms of metabolic health and digestion. It improves your immune system, and it reduces those stress hormones that can be so detrimental to our health overall. So in short, exercise can help reduce your risk of cancer, but it can also improve your life tremendously just as a rule. We are all out of time for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on how you can reduce your risk of cancer. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or specific topics that you'd like to see Jamie and I discuss on Return to Eden, leave a comment below. You can also visit us at edensessentials.com or give us a call if you need help to place an order or have any questions. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.